Hi guys, James at Goddard Radio Moscow Beer and Metal Reviews again for you today with another video beer review. I'm actually up in Caloundra in Queensland for this one, so I've relocated within Australia and I'm staying with my friend Joel here, so a big shout out to his family and a thank you for them letting me stay at their house and everything like that. But for this one we're actually going to go to Norway, and I will do some local beers for you here in Queensland soon, but for this video, as I say, we're going to go to Norway, and this is a brewery who have very good reviews, so I'm very interested to try their stuff. So we're going to go to Lervig Aktiebryggeri, who are from Stavanger in the southwest of the country, and this guy is their Hoppy American Red Ale. It's meant to be a very nice beer, this one, so I'm quite excited to try this. And if you've watched my channel before, you will know that the Red Ale is one of my kind of favourite styles of beer, so quite excited to try this one for you today. But as is usual with my beer reviews then, I'll take you through a very short bit of history about the brewery. It is very short, but if you want to get straight to the tasting, just fast forward towards the end of the video and you will get right there. The brewery website's in the description for you below, along with a link to my other reviews from this brewery. So anyway, to move on to the history of the brewery itself. As I mentioned, that these guys are based in Stavanger, which is in southwestern Norway, and this is the oil city over there. It's about 140,000 people, so it's quite an expensive city within Norway here as well, but it does have some very good beer bars, which include the Cardinal. That was one that I saw mentioned in a blog about this beer, so apparently that's a bit of a beer haven, but very expensive obviously. Stavanger is meant to be the most expensive city in Norway, which is the most expensive country in Europe, so bear that in mind if you do go over to Norway. But the Lervig Aktiebryggeri was founded in 2003 after the two brewery was sold to Carlsberg, and then subsequently the production was moved to Oslo, and apparently this caused a bit of a kind of local outrage, if you like. But for a while after the Lervig Aktiebryggeri was founded, the beers were produced at mek-ju brewery in Tromsø, which is away up in the north of Norway, and production was then moved to Lervig in Stavanger back in 2005. So they've been operating there for perhaps 8 or 9 years now, I believe it is. But the head brewer for Lervig is actually Mike Murphy, and he's been there since 2010, and prior to this the brewery were making many light lagers, but Mike actually moved them more along the direction of producing American style beers, and of course that's where the big kind of craft beer revolutions come from. But Mike apparently played quite an important role in the Danish craft beer revolution, and he was involved with obviously in the craft beer revolution over there, you know, Mikkeller, Evil Twin and things like that, but he actually brewed with Mikkel and Jeppe Bjergsø, who are the founders of those two breweries, Sean Hill, who's quite a famous American brewer over there, and there was also another guy called Andreas Kessmeyer, and I think he's involved with Ameger, so don't hold me to that one. But he also worked for Birra del Borgo in Italy, who are probably the most well-known Italian craft brewers these days. So this guy Mike Murphy, who is the brewer here, has quite a pedigree behind him. But interestingly as well, this brewery do brew some of the beers from Mikkeller as well, and as I've mentioned to you in my reviews of them, they brew most of their beer in Lochristenhout in Belgium. So these guys, as I said, are very highly rated, and they're quite a new brewery. I've never reviewed anything from these guys before, so this should be quite interesting. But that's your little brief history of the brewery for this one. So just to list the other beers that you can get from these guys. In their main range, they've got the Pilsner beer, they have this guy, which is the Hoppy, the Red Ale, as I mentioned to you at the start of the video. They have Johnny Low, which is an IPA, White Dog, which is a wit beer, Conrad Stout, Rye IPA, Winter Ale, Galaxy IPA, and also the Betty Brown, which is obviously a brown ale. So that's their main core range, but I guess that's your history of this beer now, so we'll get on to the tasting of this one. And as I mentioned to you at the start, it's an American style red ale, so when it's that kind of thing you expect a little bit more of a hoppy character. English red ales are more kind of malty based, but the American kind of variant I've found is a little bit more hoppy, but you do get that kind of really rich malt base in it. So I'll just bring up the camera and let you have a little quick look at the artwork on this one. It's quite nicely done. It looks kind of like one of these sort of 1940s, 1950s American kind of tuna cans or something like that. It reminds me a little bit of that, but you can see there it says Lervig and brewed at Lervig Aktiebryggeri in Stavanger in Norway. I'm stuttering a little bit there. It's a kind of star on the bottle cap for this one as well. I'm not sure exactly what it was, but it says it's best before the 4th of May 2015, so it's well in date, and it's 4.7% on the Richter scale, but it doesn't say. I think it says on the back it has pale malt, caramel, chocolate malt. The hops are the Chinook hops, Simcoe and Nelson Sauvin, which Nelson Sauvin obviously is from New Zealand, Chinook are from America, I think, and so are Simcoe, but you'd probably expect quite a kind of grapefruity, maybe a little bit of grapefruit, a little bit of citrus out of those hops. So let's get it open and get on with the tasting of this guy anyway. As I say, quite interested to try this one, and this is only my third Norwegian beer review for you, so the stuff I've had from them so far has been really good, so hopefully this one kind of lives up to that accolade as well. But it's a lot darker than I was expecting when I saw it. It looks more like a kind of porter beer actually, but you can smell, when you're just pouring it out here, you can definitely smell the kind of red ale characteristics that you expect of it. So if I bring this just up to the camera for you, you can see it here. You've got a nice kind of mahogany colour. If I put my fingers behind it, it's not transparent at all, but if you hold it up more to the light, you can see it is actually a kind of reddish, it's got red kind of ruby edges to it, but it's actually just that dark. I'm holding it up to the light over here, it just is that dark that it appears that it's not very transparent. It's slightly hazy, so I think it's fair to say it's a kind of slightly hazy mahogany colour on this one, and it did have just about a half finger of a kind of frothy beigeish head on it here, so it should be quite an interesting one anyway. So let's give it a smell. So on the nose, you've got the typical kind of elements that you expect of the red ale, which is obviously a big, nice, rich caramel nose. You always expect these to be quite malty on the nose, and even a lot of the American ones, you do get a nice bit of kind of fruity hop coming out on them. But you do always have that very distinct kind of dark caramel base, and this guy definitely has that. So you've got a nice kind of rich, sweet caramel aroma, but you've got that distinct roasted character to it. You can pick up a little bit as well. If you kind of stir it up a little bit, that's when you're starting to get more of the kind of fruity oils coming out. But you definitely have that typical rich roasted caramel base. There's a kind of heavier bread element comes out in the nose as well, but you've got a nice kind of hoppy base to it as well. It smells a little citrusy, but you can pick up just a wee bit of the kind of more dark and sour smell that you get from the grapefruit, if that makes sense. But there's a little bit of kind of an almost like piney resin that you expect from some of the kind of Northwest American hops in there too. And that's usually the Chinook you get that from. I remember the Chinook being a kind of quite piney resinous hop. So let's give it a taste anyway. As I mentioned to you, 4.7% American red ale, Simcoe, Chinook, Nelson Sauvin, and it said caramel and what was the other one? Pale malts in here as well. So it should be an interesting one. So let's give this a go. Yeah, on the taste, it actually has the kind of malt feel of the English red ales, if you like. And maybe just take your mouth a little time to adjust to actually get the hoppy character out of it. But the big thing that you'll notice on this that comes out first, you have this definite kind of woody taste in the malt base, which is quite interesting. Yeah, the hops come towards the front of the tongue as you move away from that malty taste. You get just this little oily, slightly citrusy fruit that comes out here, and it's just, you just feel this little bubble moving towards the front of your tongue, and that's where you get the kind of citrusy sort of oily feel to this beer, which is quite nice. But yeah, you can actually feel the pale malt coming out in this one as well. If you know your lager beers, you get this really very kind of light, slightly bready feel to it, and you can actually feel that just blanket the back of the tongue there. So you can definitely pick out the pale malt in this, but at the same time there's a kind of thicker bready element that has almost like a kind of cereal and sort of grainy spice to it, which is quite interesting, and there is just that little kind of element of wood, and in a way it reminds me a little bit of the Innocent Gun beers that we have back home. It does have just that tiny little bit of woody kind of vanilla-y flavour in it, but it's quite mild, I will say that. But you'll notice just around that kind of blanket of the bread that you get, there is a definite kind of rich caramel. It's a lot less roasted in the actual mouth than it comes across as being in the aroma. The caramel is more of a rich kind of sweet caramel, as opposed to the kind of roasted caramel you get in the nose, in my opinion. but there's a definite element of biscuity malt to this one. The caramel does have that sweeter and kind of thicker element to it at the same time that makes it more of a biscuity malt. So it's a really interesting, complex one on the malt, this. The hops are a lot more subdued than I were expecting. When it was an American red ale, I thought that this would kind of be one that was very, very hoppy, because a lot of American beers are obviously, the idea is to give them a lot of hop and a lot of flavour, but this one does kind of retain a bit more of a malt focus. So for an American red ale, in that regard, it is actually quite interesting. But yeah, you do get just a little bit of hop character. There is a bit of a kind of sort of herbal element to the hops as well. It has this kind of dry character that goes right around the edges of the tongue, but there's a little bit of a kind of piney resin and just a little bit of citrusy fruit, but it is more of a kind of herbal hop character that comes out of this one, which is again is quite different to the nose. So the nose on this beer really can deceive you from what is actually in the taste of this one. So very interesting in that regard. If you do try it yourself, just kind of think about that a little bit, that the nose is very different from the mouthfeel. So yeah, I would stick with that. In the aftertaste of this one, there is a distinct sort of kind of thicker bready character comes out, which is kind of complemented with that spice flavour that I'm talking about. You have a little bit of the woody flavour staying over. The hops as well, I would say that kind of earthy and slightly herbal character is sticking there too. So it's actually quite a complex one to think about this, which is good with a red ale, but it's nowhere near as kind of sweet and hoppy, if you like, as for example the 5 AM Saint from Brewdog. This one kind of finds a sort of middle ground between an English red ale and an American one, in my opinion. I think I would stick with that. But in terms of the mouthfeel, I'd say this guy is definitely sort of mid-bodied. The carbonation is quite moderate on this one. It does have a teeny bit of a spritzy feel to it, but it's quite it just suits it quite well. It makes it quite a drinkable red ale, this one. The carbonation in a way actually does help the mouth kind of, it almost helps introduce that sort of spicy character you have from the kind of grainy bread. So it's quite good in that regard, but the carbonation, I would say, is moderate. It's not too spritzy as you can get with some beers, but it's done just right. But I would say there's a good bit of sweetness from the caramel in the malt base of this one. You've got a little bit of juicy character from the kind of citrusy element of the hops, but that's very quickly taken over by quite a strong dry character, in my opinion. Nowhere near as dry as some of these really kind of strong American IPAs and stuff like that, but it's got quite a bit of dry character in my experience for a red ale. Usually I find them to be, when they're on cask especially, they're quite wet and things like that. This guy does have a good bit of dry character, and that really brings out a little bit of the kind of earthiness to the beer as well. And as I say, you get that lingering kind of bready, kind of spicy, woody flavour in there with just a little bit of a kind of earthy hop. But anyway, overall I would say it's a very kind of interesting, it's definitely a very interesting red ale that you should give a go of. It's interesting, as I say, because it finds that middle ground between the sort of American red ale and the English red ale. It has quite a full body for the ABV as well. I should say that for being a 4.7% beer, it does actually have a little bit of alcohol warmth to it, which again is quite an interesting feature of it. So overall I'd say it's a very interesting one that you should definitely go and check out. As I said to you at the start of the video, this brewery is very highly rated, so I'm sure whatever kind of style of beer you personally prefer, if you go and buy their version of it, I'm sure you won't be disappointed. But anyway, as usual, I hope you've enjoyed this beer review. This has been an interesting one for me to try. As always, please let me know in the comments section your own thoughts on the beer below, and please like, subscribe, share, all the usual YouTube stuff. I'll ask my Norwegian viewers to recommend some more Norwegian beer for me to have a look at, because everything I've done from your country so far has been really good, but I've only done mek-ju, now the Aktienbryggeri, Lervig, and also the Aktienbryggeri as well. So please recommend some other Norwegian beers for me to do. But as I say, I hope you've enjoyed this beer review, and I'll catch you soon with the next one, and hopefully I can get some Queensland beers in for you soon. Cheers.